In today's video, I share with you how I am getting into 10mm fantasy gaming. But before we get into today's video, just want to share with you what the GGGGs are for this month. Each month, Bob the Bowholder picks some of my Patreon supporters to receive gratitude gifts. And for this month of January of 2025, we have my pledge for the Nemesis Lockdown box that I received, but I didn't even open it up. So you're going to get all of these stretch goals from the Kickstarter mailed to you. And we have $100 going towards a crowdfunding campaign, which my Patreon supporters are currently voting upon. Go ahead and use the link below to go to my Patreon page where you can get in on the chance of receiving one of these gratitude gifts at the end of the month. So one of my friends actually reached out to me, and he is actually creating his own version of Warmaster, which is probably one of the most popular games for the 10mm scale fantasy wargaming, which actually came from Games Workshop a while back, but like a lot of other games, it was discontinued. But there is currently a pretty strong fan base that took the rules for Warmaster and has updated it, and it is actually made available for free. You can go to this page where Warmaster is called Revolution, is the most recent iteration, and you can download all of the rules and army lists again for free. So a lot of people are now, especially with 3D printing, not needing to spend hundreds of dollars of getting the original pewter miniatures that were sold a long time ago, but now you can 3D print them. Well, I actually did look into not only Warmaster, but a couple of other 10mm games. So Games Workshop actually did come out with Legion Imperialis, which is a return to the epic scale or 10mm scale sci-fi version of their game that came out last year. And interestingly enough, last year as well, Mantic came out with their Kickstarter for Epic Warpath, which is their 10mm sci-fi game. So it seems like there is a interest or return back to a smaller scale, which I think one of the biggest advantages of going smaller is that you can get that mass army feel to it, and you can field an army relatively quickly because look how tiny these things are, that you can paint them up pretty quickly, not worrying too much about all of the details around it. Also at an even smaller scale is 6mm, and this is full spectrum dominance. I did a whole video about that. Go ahead and check it out here. But that's even a smaller scale, and I was able to paint up 2 different factions, 2 armies, all of this terrain pretty quickly just because it is so small. So there is a number of advantages to going smaller than your standard 28mm or 32mm wargaming, which, to be honest, is the most popular scale. But I think there has been a little bit of a return back to smaller scale wargaming, which I'm excited about. Regardless, so my friend did reach out to me and said that he was working on a simplified version of Warmaster because, once again, I think it's too complicated, like a lot of Games Workshop games. And he's sort of combining it with Battlemaster. I don't know if you remember that old game that had hexes and had units on multi-base units moving around on the map. And he is going to be creating a hex system so that you don't have to use measuring tools in order to move units around. But he's keeping it at 10mm scale. I said I was really interested and would be willing to go ahead and print up a 10mm fantasy army and be able to test out the rules with him so that he can develop it. Before I get into 3D printing, I do want to say that there is currently a company that came out with this game called Agatoria, which does make and send you, I think they're plastic. I'm not 100% sure if they're resin or not, but you can purchase them if you don't have a 3D printer. Also, I think Wargames Atlantic also comes out with 10mm scale, although I'm not 100% sure if it is fantasy or if it can be used in a game like Warmaster. Not quite sure, but those are some of the resources in case you don't have a 3D printer. But because I do have a 3D printer, I did look into all of the various creators out there who are creating 10mm fantasy armies. And again, most of these are going to fit with Warmaster, so that's going to work out with the game that my friend is also developing. So one of the first ones that I found is Greenskin Miniatures, and for whatever reason, most of these artists are actually selling their files at Gumroad, which is not a platform that I'm used to. I thought that they might be on My Mini Factory. And so Greenskin Miniatures, it looks like they have a pretty good lineup of various armies that you can buy. And the pricing is going to be pretty similar. Here it's going to be $60. And then you can buy individual packs if you want to go that route, or if you want to supplement the army lists with some of these other ones. So a lot of these do look pretty similar to the Games Workshop, especially the Goblins. So they might look familiar. I did blow one of these up just to see the amount of detail that is found on them, and found out that it actually does really work fine, and it has plenty of detail. So I decided on an Orcs and Goblins army, and even though these looked pretty good, I did want to see what other options were out there. Mini Rat is another company or another producer who creates these STL files, and as you can see here, I think most of them have an Empire army, Orc army, elves, all of the standard armies that were found in War Master, all the different factions. So that's something to look into. But at the end of the day, I ended up going with Forest Dragon, mostly because this Orc and Goblin army pack had all of the miniatures that I wanted. So this pack pretty much gave me all the goblins, warriors, orcs, 2 different kinds of orcs, trolls, ogres. We have the wolf riders as well as the boar riders. We have both goblins and orcs on chariots. You have the giant and the wyvern, all that kinds of stuff. So almost everything that I wanted was found in this pack at $70. And I actually got a discount because here it says that you can get a 30% discount if you're a Patreon supporter. So I went ahead and supported this artist on Patreon to get that 30% discount. But I'm going to continue supporting him because it looks like he's working on a Human Empire army right now, which I feel like I would be interested in. Also, if I really like this game a lot, I might expand out to some of these other armies too. I purchased it and I downloaded it, and I went ahead and loaded up all of these on my resin build plate. This is the Hey Gears Blueprint Slicer. So it's not going to look like Cheeto Box like most of you are familiar with, or Lychee. But these files were designed to print directly on the plate. I was a little bit skeptical about this, so I did do a test print just to be able to make sure that it did print this way, especially since I like doing my own supports through Hey Gears, through their slicer. But these are only offered as pre-supports if they are on these bases. All these files are available without any supports, but all of the unsupported versions don't have the base on them. So I went ahead and wanted the base, so I did a test print, and all of these actually do print fine, standing directly on the build plate. I did a comparison where I did lift up some of them off the build plate, but there was no discernible quality difference. And again, that's because these are 10mm. Also shocking is that all of the stands can also be printed directly on the build plate without the need of any supports. So I tested this. Now, the one bad thing is on the Hey Gears Reflex, it does have holes on the build plate, and I was a little bit worried about those holes being present. And sure enough, on the side of some of these prints, you can see the holes, but it's not significant enough that it bothers me. So at the end of the day, the ease of being able to print directly on the build plate was worth it, worth having a little bit of hole indentations on the bottom of all of these files. And as you can see here, I was able to pretty much fit almost the entire army, basically having 3 stands of most of the infantry units as well as the wolf riders. I had a couple chariots. I have this catapult. I have the giant. I mean, there's just so many things that you can fit on a build plate that you normally would have to fill up maybe 4 or 5 in order to print out a full army for any other regular 28 or 32 millimeter game. I did have to print out a second one just because my bore riders didn't completely fit on this plate. But needless to say, this is a ton of miniatures that you can print out once, and it doesn't take very long because it's not that tall. All of these miniatures, obviously, you know, at 10 millimeter are most of them, but even with this giant that might be 30 millimeters tall, you know, this thing printed up in just a few hours. So just really, really quick to be able to print out a full army. And I was able to do that and got to painting. Now, in terms of painting the miniatures, on the one hand, it is easier because you can just do it super quickly. Now, what I did was I chose to glue them onto these popsicle sticks just because I like priming all of my miniatures with black spray primer. And I knew that it would just blow these pieces away, especially the individual champions. So just gluing them with some Elmer's glue onto these popsicle sticks holds them in place. And then I can spray prime them, and I can paint these while holding the popsicle stick rather than the individual stands right here. So that just made it super easy to be able to paint these up by keeping them on the sticks. I did go ahead and finish up my 6 stands of goblins. Now a stand is basically this 20 by 40 millimeter base, and you basically have 2 rows, as you can see here. But these things are so small because not only are the regular orcs 10 millimeters tall, but the goblins are half that size. So in many ways, these are the same size as the 6 millimeter infantry that I painted up for full spectrum dominance. Just so tiny. Now, if you look at this through the video camera, it just looks like a terrible paint job. But the naked eye and the fact that you're going to look at these maybe at least a foot away, if not more, on the table, just having these big splotches of paint on top of the black primer, I think just works out super well because you want high contrast and you don't need to fill in any of the details. So these look perfectly fine on the gaming table, even though close up they look like a 5-year-old painted up the miniatures. But that doesn't really matter. What the whole goal is to paint these up really quickly and try to get them on the table as quickly as possible. And I just like doing it this way. So this is my method. And I know if you're used to painting 28 or 32 millimeter regular miniatures, there might be some temptation that you go in and you paint up all of the little details. But I'm telling you, no one is really going to see them. So they do paint up relatively quickly in terms of the number of models, but it still takes quite a bit of time because you're painting up a lot more of them. At the end of the day, though, I don't think you need to spend a lot of time. I did think about using contrast colors, but because I'm just throwing paint on them and they're so small, I actually think using this method of high contrast, brighter colors on top of black actually works better. So whichever method that you use, you shouldn't be too nitpicky because they are so small, and you're going to be looking at these from at least a foot to 3 feet away. So don't spend too much time painting them up. My friend told me to only maybe print out and paint up 3 stands of each of the units at the most. And then once we play the game, you know, obviously I can add more if I want. I went ahead and did 6 stands of both the goblins and the orcs just in terms of infantry. But overall, I followed that as at least a beginner of a place of where I want to be printing and painting up this army. But again, just check out this size comparison. This is a 28 millimeter Sister of Battle. And compared to this hero right here, I mean, look how tiny that is. I apologize. I was intending on having all my army painted up so that you can see what they all look like. But I ran out of time and needed to get this video out. I'm going to be traveling this next week, so might not have a weekly video happening while I am on vacation, but wanted to get this video out and show you why I'm getting into 10 millimeter gaming. I do think that there is an advantage where, because they're small, not only can you paint them up really quickly, but also you do have that epic sense of mass army battle. So if I really like this a lot, I might foray into smaller scale sci-fi games, war games, maybe even apocalypse style number of miniatures on the board. But that'll be something maybe in a future video that I will check out. So make sure to like and subscribe, because I will go ahead and follow up once I finish painting up all of these miniatures so that you can see what my army looks like. In the least, I will post pictures on my Patreon Discord channel. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and become a Patreon supporter. It only takes $1 to get into the Discord channel, and you can see me posting my progress of these tiny little guys as I paint them up. Otherwise, happy gaming. We'll see you next time.